All right, so I'm back for part two of this. I'm going to try to keep this brief to finish up the section notes here. So I had left off with Hitler invading France in May of 1940. France falls by June of 1940. By August, Hitler starts ordering bombings of England, and England is in some like really rough shape at this point. Here is a map of Europe by the end of 1939, by the fall of 1939. You can kind of see where the map is. You have Italy down here, who is an ally of theirs. Albania is a member of the Central Powers. This half of Poland has been invaded. You have Russia over here kind of doing their own thing, trying to stay out of the way. Hitler and the Nazis had invaded Austria, Czechoslovakia, this part of Poland, as I said. They had invaded Denmark and Norway, which I had not talked about. They had invaded Netherlands, Belgium. So, I mean, between Italy and Germany, they have controlled almost all of England. If you look through this map, there's not a whole lot left. There's this half of France. There's Russia that they haven't invaded and conquered yet. There's England, which they haven't conquered yet, but they're bombing. I do want to make note of this southern part of France. While they did conquer France, they would conquer Paris, and in effect, France is knocked out of the war at this point. There is still a portion of France that is not Nazi controlled. If you ever take an advanced class in World War II, this area is known as Vichy France. This is sort of the free France. All of the French soldiers that wanted to resist the Nazis fled down here. While they're not sort of engaged in active fighting, they are still trying to defeat the Nazis in one way or another. A lot of times it's just sort of sabotage, spying, a lot of terrorist tricks and tactics, but this southern part of France was not really all that Nazi controlled. That gets into sort of what was going on in the Atlantic Ocean. Again, the United States knew what was coming. We knew our time staying out of this war was going to end at some point. By the spring of 1941, German submarines start popping up all over the Atlantic Ocean. We saw this story already with World War One, where with German U-boats sinking everything in sight. That was a real dangerous time, and we're seeing that again. And right before we get involved in World War II, Franklin Roosevelt wastes no time. He orders what he calls a shoot-on-sight order for all U.S. warships. If they see a German U-boat, you sink it. Even though we're not technically at war and we're not allowed to do this, this could be a dangerous thing. By August of 1941, FDR and Churchill secretly agreed with one another that when the United States gets involved in the fight, that we would refuse to take new lands. Both sides would. It was a sort of a pre-war agreement that we pretty much acknowledged we're going to get into this war, but it's not yet. So by June of 1941, Hitler stabs Russia in the back. So coming back to this map over here, Hitler and Italy has kind of controlled most of this map over here. The USSR, the Soviet Union, this area here, what's going to end up happening is Hitler is going to invade Russia at this point in June of 1941, completely surprising the Russians, and that's going to bring Russia into the war. Russia is going to declare war on Germany at that point and join an alliance with England. And then that gets into how the United States gets involved in World War II. Kind of like with World War One, we waited until we got attacked. World War II, we don't get into the war until our nose gets bloodied a little bit. Sort of to explain the full story here, Pearl Harbor doesn't just happen. It's not just a surprise attack. It's like, oh my God, why did the Japanese attack us? We knew something was coming. Everything starts in July of 1941. Japan had been showing aggression. I talked about that in the previous lecture video, how they had invaded Manchuria in China. In July of 1941, they invade a piece of territory known as French Indochina. Today it's known as Vietnam. Franklin Roosevelt's reaction to this invasion of French Indochina, or Vietnam, was to freeze all Japanese assets in the United States. If there was a Japanese citizen that owned something in America, they lost it. They didn't get to own it. Anything the Japanese government owned in America, they didn't get to keep anymore. And we also placed an embargo. Basically, we shut them off to the rest of the world for any oil, steel, or gas. So Japan was not allowed to buy any of those products, and that was going to be damaging to Japan. The prime minister of Japan, his name was Hideki Tojo. He sent a peace mission to Washington D.C. to actually try to end this embargo and find out a way that Japan could start buying oil, steel, and gas again. But the entire time was secretly planning the Pearl Harbor invasion. The Japanese reason for attacking us at Pearl Harbor was solely because we placed an embargo on the Japanese. We cut off their oil, their steel, and the gas. They needed that. So the reason they decided to attack us was because they felt that our embargo on them was almost an act of war. And what they wanted to do was sort of like with Hitler and his Blitzkrieg, was to sort of like shock and awe and like take us by surprise. Pearl Harbor was supposed to be a sneak attack invasion. It wasn't to conquer Hawaii. It wasn't to conquer the United States. Their goal was, what Hawaii was to us at that point, was a naval station, pretty much. Most of our Pacific naval fleet was sitting in Pearl Harbor at Hawaii. Their hope was that in one foul swoop, they could come in and just decimate, totally destroy the American Navy, to the point that even if we declared war, we'd have no boats that we could actually do anything with. And in essence, crippling the United States war effort before we ever got involved. And it was damaging. The date to remember, and you do need to know this for the test, we have a national holiday for this now, December 7th, 1941. That was the day that the Japanese would invade Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Throwing out some numbers for you, to try to put this into perspective, 20 of our warships would be destroyed, roughly 200 of our airplanes. This is absolutely devastating to our Navy. It's not crippling. We kind of got lucky that it wasn't as destructive as the Japanese were hoping for. We actually had a good chunk of our fleet that was not docked at Pearl Harbor, but it was still really, really devastating. It killed 2,400 Americans, 1,100 of them alone on a boat known as the USS Arizona, which still sits in the waters off Pearl Harbor. It's now a memorial today. You can walk out above the USS Arizona and like look down on it. The 1,100 men are still in the boat to this day. They are never able to retrieve the remains. This is the point in time where America declares war on Japan. Now, I don't know if you can see the entire quote here. I do love this quote. While this does achieve the Japanese objective of taking us by surprise, the Japanese admiral, his name was Yamamoto, who was in charge of the attack. And I don't know if you can see the whole quote because probably my fat face is stuck in front of part of it. The quote is, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Yamamoto knew that this was probably going to be a horribly difficult fight for the Japanese, and that their worry was that they might have picked a fight with somebody that was too big and too strong for them. This is just a brief map of the attack plans. Japan's planes lifted off from Japan. They flew out, hit Hawaii, flew back. Yeah, so there's that. And here is a quick picture of the USS Arizona. So you can kind of see here where the boat is. This is the memorial now, where you can actually go out on a boat, go on the memorial above it, and look down upon the wreckage. As I said, there's still 1,100 bodies that are in that boat. I've got a couple of really cool videos that I would strongly urge you to watch. This one is kind of cool, the PBS one. The one I really like, though, is like the actual news footage from after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's much older, but I do like the old videos quite a bit. So I would strongly recommend. They're not long videos; they're just a few minutes. So I know I talked a lot with these couple of lecture videos, but I just love World War II, and I can't not talk about it. So I'm all done. The chapter is finished. We'll kind of progress to get ready for your chapter test next week. We'll take the chapter test on Friday next week, and just take the quiz that's attached with this.